Welcome to Fix Your Heart or Die, where we forge and repair relationships by making connections through Twin Peaks. I'm your host, Shy Fox, and ever since discovering a hyperfixation for the show right before the passing of David Lynch, I have been seeing electric connections between it and all my favorite games, movies, and TV shows. Now, I want to follow that power line of pop culture legacy wherever it takes me, deepening my parasocial relationships with my favorite voices in podcasting. Keep in mind, I am not an expert, and you don't need to be either to enjoy our silly, serious little show. Myself and longtime Lynch fan Jonathan off Road Rules will show you why you probably already love so much about Twin Peaks, even if you've never seen it, just like I did for 30 years. We will keep spoilers to a minimum so you can get into the show too. However, please understand that we consider the show to be somewhat spoiler-proof because of the unique nature of its story. You'll see what we mean. Anyway, sit back and strap in for the gripping mystery of how everything is a spin-off of Twin Peaks in this exciting episode of Fix Your Heart or Die!
It's me.
Hi, it's you. Wow.
Yeah, sorry.
Welcome to the Two Daniels show.
It sounds great. Have you already done it?
No, I haven't done it yet. Testing 1, 2. Testing. Agent Shy Fox on mic. Eileen, it's 1 p.m., Boston, Massachusetts, the city of beans. As you may have guessed by the extreme professional production of this podcast, I have purchased a new Blue Yeti microphone, also known as the Z-List Mediocre Content Creator Starter Pack, at the Best Buy on Mall Woods Drive. I decided to pass on the Best Buy credit card option to get even more stuff for the show, Eileen. Leasing fancy equipment may seem like a fast track to having a successful Patreon, but modest equipment will let you make a good show before you make a perfect one. I have been commissioned to come here by a mysterious client known only to me as JSS. They have paid me handsomely to solve a central mystery of Beantown, one surrounding Boston's favorite son himself, Jonathan off Road Rules, from MTV's Road Rules, The Northern Trail. JSS tells me this special boy once swept Boston and the nation at large like wildfire, through a foggy forest of Douglas firs, sycamore, and giant spruce. I've never imagined so many trees in my life, Eileen. Anyway, apparently Jonathan was the hottest star to ever grace stage or screen, culminating in his unforgettable work taking care of pigs and secretly masturbating to a poster and a trailer to MTV's delighted audience of millions. But then afterward, he simply disappeared, never to be famous again. He did some light video game journalism, sucker, and he records some comedy podcast where a large British wrestler and a tiny mustache boy pitch new ideas to kickstart his career. But as far as notoriety goes, he seems trapped eternally in the Road Rules Lodge, never to escape its ethereal grasp. That is what I'm here to find out, Eileen. No matter what these lovely boys try, fame eludes Jonathan at every turn. They've thrown spiders at him, they've made him into a living toilet, they've even offered him production roles for fellow thespian Willem Dafoe. I need to figure out once and for all why he continues to wallow in obscurity. Where does Jonathan go in between recording episodes of his own little shows? And when, oh when, Eileen, will he be famous again?
That was acting. You're in. You are the Agent Cooper of your own mind and my soul. You're driving around in there talking to Eileen. How mysterious. Who is she going to be? Is she going to show up in season 3? Who knows?
Oh, we'll find out.
Shy, you nailed it.
I hope if she shows up in season 3 that nothing is revealed about her like has been revealed about Diane in The Return. But
yeah, Diane had a rough road and was really...
She sure did.
Emotionally pungent and connective. You couldn't help but smell her sorrow. At least that's how I feel. Garmin Bozia as well. It's a real... It makes you feel like you're eating garbage. It's very special.
Absolutely.
I'm getting ahead of myself.
No. Well, part of Twin Peaks for me, and I'm Shy Fox, this is Jonathan Off-Road Rules, the subject of our mystery today.
I am a mystery.
He sure is. He's one of the most mysterious human beings I've ever had the pleasure of witnessing from afar. So breaking the meta concept, just segue into the conversational aspect of this show. I'm Shy Fox. I'm a huge fan of Jonathan from MTV's Road Rules, which is what I'll refer to him from now on. This is his stage name, so to speak. Jonathan, how are you doing today, sir?
Pretty good. It's been busy up in my neck of the woods. There's a snow day. I needed to shovel out my car and get my 9-year-old to the movies. But before that, my 1-year-old got scratched in the face by a cat. So it's been hectic and packed, jam-packed. I did a drawing for Daniel Sanfordino.
Daniello Sanfordolamenti.
Thank you. I'll never be able to repeat it. Of some characters I draw for Nintendo Force magazine, because we put together a comic for patrons of the Talking to Women About Video Games podcast. But Daniel Sanfordolamenti wanted a drawing, and I said, I got to do that too. So my baby is bleeding while he's grabbing my markers, and I'm doing a drawing of the Switch as a black woman with afro puffs. It's just a typical Sunday.
Yeah, typical Sunday for Jonathan Off-Road Rules.
Nothing normal happens, but I'm so used to it that to me it is normal. I was watching the movie What's Eating Gilbert Grape at like 1 a.m. with Tanya, who listeners of Talking to Women About Video Games will know, and she's like, so you're just Gilbert Grape then?
Yeah.
You're just graping it up in this small town, and you've got weird mom, and you've got weird brother, son, you've got to watch over. Because my oldest son just says, you're my brother. Like, you're 9. We're not brothers. I'm your father. Put it here, brother. Just like, it does, the words that I say don't matter. He just is on his own track, and I love him.
I think that's incredible.
Yeah. I'm having quite an adventure of a life. Thank you for asking. Sorry if that answer was a little longer than you expected.
No, well, something to establish. The reason you're telling me all this and going into so much detail is that you and I, we don't really know each other. We have a very parasocial relationship that's mostly one-sided on my end, where I listen to everything you do and think about you all the time, and you don't think about me at all, and you have no reason to, because I'm not out there doing anything for you to think about.
Well, you have sweetly and kindly sent me Twitter DMs, so I know you're thinking about me. Sometimes like every 3 days, sometimes once a week.
It can be a pretty heavy flow.
Just stuff you think is funny.
I see so many things on Twitter. I'm off Twitter, but I see so many things on Blue Sky.
Yeah.
At Fire Wank with me, by the way. Wink, wink.
Which is now it is a polarized or solarized picture of me when I was 18. I think that's the avatar picture for it now. So
it is, yeah. Your famous flat top haircut and everything.
The high top fade of old. Yeah, I just found the hard copy of that whole photo shoot that my aunt did and gave it to my mom. She's looking at all those pictures right now, weirdly enough. So, is it a coincidence?
Sure. I'm going to need you to scan those in immediately, by the way. If she's holding them right now, walk into the other room, take them out of her hands, and just go ahead and start the scan process.
I could get to that after all the stuff is done. Then I will get to the scanning, which I look forward to doing. I have to scan a picture for Daniel anyway, so I'll just slip in a couple of pictures of me because that's what people want. It's both like flattering. It's stressful whenever I have a new task. I'm like, oh no, am I going to get that done? And then it's like this this person wants pictures of me. You just want pictures of me for some reason.
I mean, who wouldn't?
A lot of people! Well, that's okay.
I don't think so. I think a lot of people would, and we just need to find them. We just need to get out there and put pictures of you out there, and then the audience will show itself.
Well, that's what David Lynch did with Twin Peaks, to segue into that show.
Yes.
He had done The Elephant Man, which got him the eye of other directors, and he had met with like Stanley Kubrick, who loved that movie, and I think George Lucas pitched to him to direct Return of the Jedi or something.
Yeah.
So he was poised towards greatness. Then he did Dune, and Dune totally bombed, and they're like, well, I guess this weirdo doesn't actually have a mainstream audience. So we got together with a guy...
Mark Frost,
thank you. Had worked on Saint Elsewhere and like one other like nighttime soap. Can't remember the name of it. And they put together this show, and it completely changed television and video games forever, as far as I can tell.
especially video games. Yeah, that's the thing about it is you and I are video game guys, and this is my journey with Twin Peaks. The first time I heard of Twin Peaks was when I played The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, and all of the enthusiast press around it kept mentioning, oh, this is a weird little Zelda game, it's unusual, it's like a full Zelda game you can hold in your hand, which is strange in itself. But also, this world and this story, they're not like other Zelda worlds and stories so far. There had only been 3 Zelda games up until then. Mm-hmm. And it has this weird dreamlike atmosphere. It has all these strange townspeople who speak in sort of cryptic, jokey riddles all the time. And it has a very odd flavor. And every magazine I would see back in the day would say, oh, this is just like Twin Peaks. It's like if Zelda was Twin Peaks. And I would tell myself, okay, that makes sense. This is what Twin Peaks is. It's The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening.
Sure.
But I'm 34 years old. I was barely born when Twin Peaks started to air, and it was an adult television show that very much requires an adult mindset to appreciate fully, I'm finding. And I was not going to watch Twin Peaks back then. But I got on a track where I kept playing and watching things and then hearing comparisons to Twin Peaks. And that would always intrigue me. And then just during the last year, I decided to start watching Twin Peaks because a bunch of podcasters I love were covering David Lynch. Your own show, Boston's Favorite Son, had a show called Fire Wank with me.
Oh, that's right.
James Stephanie Sterling, who was the host of that show, who is your British wrestler tormentor, they got really into Twin Peaks all of a sudden, and they went ahead and just went whole hog into this weird fandom and started pitching you weird ideas based on that once in a while. And that captivated my imagination enough to get me to finally directly check it out. So I started in the weirdest possible place. I started with The Return. I started with episode 8 of The Return, which is the most famous episode, I would say.
Can we talk about that just briefly? Yeah. So, already a surprising decision to start with The Return. And then to start specifically halfway through The Return, if I remember correctly. There's 16 episodes. And episode 8 gets talked about a lot. And it certainly blew my mind when I watched it. Without the context, I can't even imagine starting with that. Not to spoil it with folks, but if I remember correctly, is that the one that starts with Trent Reznor?
It ends with Trent Reznor.
Trent with Trent Reznor.
Yeah, he's the 9 Inch Nails, specifically, as they call them, perform at the Roadhouse at the end of that episode. Or it might even be somewhere in the middle, and then there's some footage afterward, if memory serves.
Yeah. I remember the very, very end of that episode is deeply unsettling, but almost in a mainstream horror movie way. Like, it's a very interesting episode because it asks a lot of people in terms of endurance and commitment to watching a thing that is definitely not designed to entertain in the first part. And I love that they got Trent Reznor for that episode because, as folks know, he's still saying this. He more often than not will get on stage and say something like, "Did you come here to have a good time?" And the crowd will be like, "Yeah!" And he'll be like, "Well, that was the other guys. We're here to have a bad time." He's just like, suffer. He's suffering, and he's like, let's share in that.
I'll say this about his music. It definitely comes across like he wants me to suffer.
Yeah, and that episode in particular, that song is just pure emptiness. Anger and sadness, but not enough energy to truly get any empowerment from those feelings. It's just truly defeated, that song. Like he lost completely and then sang about it somehow accurately. But it's not entertainment. Until then, it suddenly turns into like a pretty effective, almost conventional horror movie about men with beards. And they'll get you. So,
they gotta have a light, you know? They just need it.
They do. And you may not know this, but those characters, the woodsmen, were going to be in a video game that David Lynch was planning to make on CD-ROM, I think after Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, after the movie. But he still just had all these feelings about fire and ships and men with beards. So they were going to be like pivotal characters in what I think was going to be either like FMV or a point-and-click game, but then the company that he had worked with to do it lost all their money because they were the kind of company that were like, let's just make a David Lynch game before David Lynch was again beloved. So his career is definitely up and down, where people think he's the best and then people think he's a washed-up failure and can't make any money. Then he's back, and now he's no longer with us. He just passed away. And I recently just watched his last ever YouTube video, because he also made animated shorts and YouTube videos people don't talk about.
Yes, absolutely.
We'll get to that later, but he went out with a bang, in my opinion. But
absolutely. And that's the ultimate flow of the ebb and flow of his career, because the last time he was really in the public consciousness, I feel like, was when The Return came out.
Yeah.
And of course, that was hailed by the few 100,000 people who paid any attention, myself not included, because as I said, I just watched the show. It was hailed as a masterpiece. The AFI calls it the best film of the decade, and which is wild since it's 18 hours long if you add it all up together. But they consider it one film, as does he. Speaking of which, so the reason I started halfway through that film, so to speak, is that I had heard so much about episode 8. I had heard, just from what I knew of the David Lynch vibe, I had watched Eraserhead 15 years ago or so on mushrooms, and I did not remember anything about it. So that was my previous David Lynch experience. I think I'd seen Mulholland Drive at some point. So I knew Lynch's deal, and I had an idea of what Twin Peaks is through pop culture osmosis. I know what happens with Laura Palmer. I knew what happened with the whole, they solved the mystery too early and the show just kind of putters around and tries to find out what it is going to be, and then it gets canceled.
Right.
So I knew all of this going into episode 8 of The Return, and because of all that preloaded knowledge, it kind of made it a standalone, perfect entree to David Lynch's whole deal for me, I feel like, where I was seeing answers to questions I didn't even know I should have, such as, did Laura Palmer's spirit come out of the fireman's head in a castle, and he sent her to Earth to be the ultimate counter to a bubble that came out of Judy, and to counteract basically all the evil that nuclear warfare brought into the world and electricity helped introduce into the world. I didn't know I should have those questions going in.
Well, yeah, I don't think anyone's ever asked it quite that way either, but that is exactly right. Yeah, for folks listening who may not have watched the show and are wondering, is he just making up stuff? No, that is exactly what that episode does for you, while also getting into maybe what happened. People theorize that the character at the end of the episode is Laura Palmer's mom when she was younger, kind of trying to get a piece of what traumas led her to become infected with this overarching evil that bothers so many people and bothers the world in the show, where it's Bob and Judy. Beelzebub, I believe Bob is supposed to be a play on Beelzebub, and Judy is another biblical demon with a name slightly
Yeah,
twisted.
like Judeat or something like that. Yeah,
That's right. You know your Twin Peaks already. You're deep in.
Also, I'm one of those people who I'll get hyperfixated on something, and for at least a few months, it will become my entire life. And ever since watching episode 8 and then starting back at the beginning of the series and working my way back up, so I finished The Return. I got caught back up, and then I finished The Return right before David Lynch died, just a couple weeks before.
Weird.
And so I get into this hyperfixation, and I start feeling so connected to this man, and I start feeling like his work is made specifically to speak to me on a lot of levels. And then he fucking dies.
Yep.
And I just, I feel so distraught. And I also feel somewhat like a fraud because it's like, oh, this man was a tremendous genius and I did nothing to support him when he was actually alive. And I feel almost a responsibility to understand everything about him and his work that I can now that he's gone.
Sure.
Not that he would help me understand it if he was still around anyway, since that was sort of his whole shtick, was not wanting us to understand it if we couldn't figure it out ourselves.
Well, this is incredibly disrespectful, but he also once put a woman's underwear, I think, in his mouth. Did he do that on live stream? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I hadn't heard that, but I believe it. I
could have sworn there was like a charity live stream where he was like, okay, I'm ready when you are, Sheila. And then a woman just takes off her underwear. He's like, here we go. and I'm pretty sure they ended up somewhere near his face, at least. And he's like, wow. You know, he didn't know what to do about it. So that
sounds incredible. And sometime, if your comfort and schedule permit, we will have you recreate that live stream in some fashion.
I don't want to wear my mouth. Don't want to wear my mouth. So he was one who, from what I've heard, everybody who's talked about him said he treated human beings with such love and reverence. He hated systems, particularly capitalist systems, money-making systems, would swear up and down when somebody was putting money before art and really stick it to oftentimes the people who were financing his work. The return almost didn't happen because they were going to not give him enough money to do it. And he's like, I can't make good art while I'm getting squeezed at the same time.
And then it wound up being twice as long as Showtime wanted it to, with twice as many episodes, twice as much content, and they wound up having to pay every actor for every episode because he insisted it was a film and he would just throw 30 seconds of an actor or a character into one episode with almost no context and almost no apparent reason for them to be there. But that meant they would get a full paycheck for it. And of course executives hate shit like that.
That's right. And he didn't make any mainstream film after that, other than he was in The Fabelmans as John Ford. He was in a Spielberg movie afterwards. But in terms of directing any normal channel stuff, it was just his YouTube videos and his albums and stuff like that.
Good for him when it comes to that. He truly embraced digital video with Inland Empire before almost anyone else in Hollywood had embraced that format. And then he embraced sort of guerrilla content creator sort of outlets before anyone else mainstream or, as a big Oscar-winning filmmaker did.
Yeah.
I mean, what other Oscar-making filmmakers are out there having their own YouTube channels where they just bullshit around?
Yeah, exactly. Or he had what was his animated series? He had a black and white animated series where he drew everything. And as the creator of Teenage Pokemon, I often think I should have done something a little more mainstream friendly and made money for everybody. And then David Lynch just makes a show, I think it's called just like Dumb Fucks. I can't remember. There's a guy who's like, I fuck sheep. And then another guy's just like, and just does a huge wet fart. And that's it. And you're like, David Lynch, filmed by David Lynch. Then there's his monkey movie. Have you seen that one on Netflix?
Jack. What Jack did, right?
Yeah, something like that. I can't remember the exact name. It's hard to keep it all straight. Before, though, I was going to tell you that if you wanted to understand David Lynch, you know what he would say. He would just tell you to meditate. an hour a day.
And I plan on it.
Well, that's it's done. A done deal. You're going to get there then. Most people don't do it after they hear that.
I will be meditating through the journey of this podcast. And that's not a joke. It's something I've always meant to get into, and this is just the perfect excuse to do that.
That's amazing. It is proven to prolong your life.
Oh no. Well, I'm not going to do that then.
to make you enjoy your life, to feel productive and at peace, to get off of the mental hamster wheel, so to speak, that leaves us in fight or flight most of the time. But the reason he loved transcendental meditation so much is he essentially didn't take credit for his own creativity, other than he said he would open his mind up. He thought of himself as an antenna, which is part why a lot of people think electricity plays into so many of his stories. He saw himself as just a window that he would open through meditation. Ideas would come to him, and then he would just do his best to communicate those ideas that came to him. He didn't think he created them. He thought that he received them from somewhere and then tried to communicate them to others, which is a very humble way of looking at being a creative genius. I personally am not sure that that's how it works. I come up with ideas too. I don't know where they come from, but I tend to think it's my subconscious, and I chewed on all the things that happened in my life and then spit them out through some idea I had. I tend to think that's what happened with him too. But the fact that he remained so authentic from beginning to end, I do think it may have to do with the fact that he didn't understand normal social interactions in a lot of ways either. I don't think he was diagnosed ever, or at least not public about it. A lot of folks think he was neurodivergent in some way. But it allowed him to cut through the bullshit and not care about trivial things, whatever it was. And he cared about being as authentic as a communicator as he possibly could, pretty much at all times, which is why his stuff is so great. And it's why imitators
fail.
It often fail because they're copying the surface level weirdness, they're copying the style. They're not saying, oh, the reason he's so weird is because he's different from everybody else, and the reason he's different from everybody else isn't because he's trying to be strange, it's because he's just being authentic. And if you show who you really are, you're gonna look like an individual, because most of the things we do that make us look like other people is attempt to conform, and he never, ever did that. He actually said to George Lucas, George, I can't do your Jedi movie. I'm gonna fuck it up. You know, like he kind of yelled at him. And
he's right. I mean, that would have been a weird movie. Return of the Jedi isn't my favorite Star Wars. I'm only sort of a Star Wars fan. I'm not much into the modern stuff. I might even like the prequels more than I like the modern stuff.
The prequels are more Lynchian, and people get really pissed at me when I say that, because they think the prequels are just straight up bad, but they are authentic.
I independently came to that conclusion while watching through Fire Walk with Me, especially, because a lot of Fire Walk with Me reminds me of the Star Wars prequels.
Yeah.
And you've always been, we're getting through so many tangents and back roads here, but this is how it's going to go. You have always been the biggest booster of the Star Wars prequels that I know. You authentically like them, from what I can tell.
Yeah, I could recognize the craft mistakes or the craft failures that people point out ad nauseum, and also I think those craft mistakes are often, not always, but they often are just communicating what George Lucas really wanted to do and really wanted to say with those movies. He really truly doesn't care about getting the most vivacious take. He truly didn't care that much about Han Solo, but if I remember correctly, his wife, who recognized that you need like charm and charisma for mainstream movies, like we need to boost this Han Solo guy. If I remember correctly, George Lucas originally wanted the first Star Wars movie that later became Episode 4, A New Hope. He was like, let's have 30 minutes of droids. Just droids talking about how it's going.
Sure.
And there is a ton of droids in that one that they wouldn't do in a modern one, where they're just walking through the desert being like, I don't think this is a good idea. Oh, there's sand in my gears. Like 10 minutes of that.
And Star Wars has that quality to it where, because he had those intentions, he built so many flavorful background characters and locations into the movies that the actual movies weren't very concerned about. Which is why modern Star Wars is just about picking through scenes of old Star Wars things for background characters and elements and saying, what if we made a whole story about this? What if we just pick through George Lucas's garbage and have ideas that seem like they might have been come up with by an actual artist? And then we'll just make a whole billion-dollar franchise out of that. How about that?
I can't disagree. I was pained by the sequel trilogy for the most part, but I weirdly really liked the last one that everyone hated, Rise of Skywalker.
Yes.
Skywalker?
I never got around to seeing it, but yes, tell me.
It's so unabashedly what it is. Like, the other ones are like, are we a real movie or are we just a rehash? And this one's like, no, we're just going to rehash everything. We're going to do it and almost make fun of ourselves while we're doing it. It's certainly, out of all of the movies, it is a movie about people who had to make a 9th Star Wars movie, and how are they going to make this possibly have any meaning to it?
Any identity or artistry or significance.
Exactly. And it's all about identity and trying to be as good a person as you can, even though the deck is stacked against you to be a piece of garbage that's continuing the work of an evil empire that only cares about amassing power. So I see that movie as the Emperor is Disney. I see Kylo Ren as being J.J. Abrams. I have a whole headcanon about it, and I won't trouble you about that now. But long story short...
We'll try to find time to just talk about that at some point if possible, because that I would love to watch that movie, especially through that lens now. Yeah.
People have said you're desperately trying to explain the movie to people in a way so they won't hate it anymore, but if you need that, then it's a bad movie, and I have to back up and say, you're right, people should just get to watch something, and if they don't like it, then that means the movie was bad. But I do hope that my ramblings about Rise of Skywalker can help people to hate it less, because it's uncomfortable just walking around the world hating a movie.
I don't see the point of it much. I've never been... at least since I was a teenager, I've never been much into spending energy on hating things. And in fact, my pleasures are almost entirely guilty to a certain point, where I spend a lot of my time intentionally watching things that aren't supposed to be good or other people don't regard as good. It's a habit I picked up growing up on things like Mystery Science Theater 3000, where they found ways to turn garbage movies into art, and in the meantime, while you're watching those bad movies, and people are making fun of them for your benefit, you see a lot within those movies that has potential and has something to say. And sometimes it's just a few fleeting moments here and there, but something that seems impossible is making an entire hour-and-a-half plus movie and having nothing to say the entire time. So you're going to find something in even the worst dreck of pop culture, and oftentimes, due to the unpolished and unexamined nature of that, you're going to find something unique that you don't find in mainstream culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an inevitability of digging through the detritus that society has left behind. You're going to find some gold.
Detritus. I couldn't agree more, and I got to learn detritus. I think from context, I know what that means, but I'm going to Google it later and trust.
Sure.
And I just learned a trick from Alex Winter on Blue Sky, who played Bill in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Freak, the movie Freak.
Freaked,
More
yeah.
famously? Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, where Keanu Reeves plays a Wolfman Castro, I think. He says if you Google something these days, you've got to add a swear to it, because that keeps AI from giving you a BS answer to it.
Wow.
So, like,
Okay.
Google detritus assholes or buttholes even might work.
And you'll probably just find pictures of yourself from your past podcast appearances, and then everything will come full circle.
I think that would be if I threw anus in there. Anus me and Anus were a real match in people's minds for some time, for reasons I just tried to hope were kind.
And even though that was the catalyst for your current level of fame, I'm glad things have moved on beyond that, because even when I was just, and I don't know if this will make it into the recorded show, even when I was emailing you, I was telling you, I know that I'm a weird crackpot fan who came out of nowhere and started throwing money at you to beg you to do a show with me whenever you have time. I know how this probably comes across. You probably think I'm going to try to do some bargain basement Sterling impression at you and just like try to act like I'm your best friend and try to act like I want to molest you and basically make all these dumb, weird comments, because I've heard you mention at conventions and stuff, people harassing you in that manner back when you did those sorts of things. And I know that that's part of the real reason you're not famous, is because you know what being famous is, and it means being everyone's stupid fucking monkey that dances around whenever anyone asks. And that's not what you are here to me at all.
Ah, it's kind. Yeah, the amount of money you sent spoke to me, unless you're just very rich, which is possible. I hope so. But it spoke to me. It spoke to me more that you wanted to show me that you appreciated me and that you took this seriously, that you weren't doing this, you know, you're not going to, I think you sent me over $50 today suddenly. I didn't ask for it. I don't think I asked for anything, and I would have.
You don't have to ask to get paid for doing work, in my opinion.
I don't get paid to do a lot of stuff, and it's only work if you have to meet a certain standard. So you simultaneously said, I want to appreciate you and give you money, and also I don't want you to feel responsible. I don't want you to feel like you need to meet a certain standard. You can mess up or talk about whatever you want. So you really just wanted to treat me like a king for some reason, suddenly.
Well, you are my king. I've gotten thousands of dollars. I've gotten thousands of dollars worth of entertainment out of your voice alone.
It's hard to
and
believe.
I've barely given you, over the years, I think I've been members of your various projects that pay you in any way. Intermittently, I drop in and out of Patreons as my financial situations change and I have less and more time to listen to podcasts, but I've given you less than $100 throughout the over a decade that you've been making me laugh my absolute ass off just by being yourself. And it's time to pay it back. And I'm not rich. I do have resources. And what I think about podcasting, especially right now, is that everyone wants to go out and buy a Blue Yeti microphone. Everyone wants to start a Twitch channel where they play a video game and mumble along recycled jokes that they hear on other Twitch streams. People want to be creative and they want to be famous, but they want to skip the part where there's any sort of production or any sort of there's any sort of artistic starting point or theory that's being explored at all. And that's fine, because a lot of internet content is just sort of disposable. Let me hang out with someone who I wish I could hang out with in real life while they play a video game I like, sort of stuff. There's nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
I don't want to do it. I think it's very boring. I don't even like watching that stuff particularly, even though I love video games a lot. I think that a project like this, it demands, especially since podcasting is starting to become a demonetized space as advertisers move on from it. Patreon is really the only game in town for podcasters anymore. I think that not only will it help me get attention if I offer to pay people to be on the show, but I want to establish what I want podcasting to be, which is a space where people get to talk about interesting things for an hour or so, and then they get to leave being compensated for that, knowing that their opinions and their time were both valuable to the person making the project. And if we keep treating everyone and everything in this space like it's valuable, maybe that will become some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts, where people will feel valuable and they'll feel comfortable going out and sharing their opinions, and there will be a precedent for supporting them doing so.
Well, it's a wonderful thing. It all ties back to Twin Peaks in my brain. Everything you were saying before about being authentic and genuine and taking risks. That's definitely what Lynch had to do with Frost when they created Twin Peaks originally.
And like you were saying.
Yeah, you were saying too. It's like we know each other.
Yeah.
It's
And you were saying, for instance, ideas come to him. He's just a window for the ideas. Like famously, he says that he finally figured out the murder mystery when he was leaning against a hot car and he was getting dizzy and it just sort of appeared to him.
I forgot that one. Yeah.
And when you know what the twist is, you don't, and we'll talk about twists and spoilers here in a minute. That's a big main topic I want to cover specifically with you. When he figured out the twist that it was going to both be who is the most obvious answer, but it's also going to be an answer nobody could have seen coming, which is that played by a grip from the show who used to hold mics and microphones for the recording of the actual Twin Peaks show. It's going to be that grip and urging him to give in to his worst impulses of human evil. And so both and a character you've never heard of and has only been referred to obliquely a few times is responsible for this. So it sure seems like something someone came up with when they were leaning against a hot car and got dizzy. I have no trouble believing that. When David Lynch reports that's how it happened.
And it felt real to him. That's the thing. When it felt real, he went with it. And for you, what you described, how you want to will into existence a world where people are appreciated and compensated for being on podcasts, even though you also don't want it to be work. It's just weirdly what David Lynch also wanted his creative process to be and his collaborations to be. As you said, he worked really hard to make sure the actors got paid as much as possible for as little work as possible.
And that they got Oscar nominations for things by sitting out on the road and advertising for them himself. And
yeah, Laura Dern, he had made a giant poster of her and sat on a lawn chair and was just like, give it to Laura for like an hour, just like shouting at people. But Laura Dern, Bruce Dern's daughter.
And it's gorgeous.
Yeah. He decided that you can't wait for things to be the way you think they should be. You can't build to it slowly. If you can decide in this moment, this is how it's done, then you do it that way. And maybe you'll end up in the poorhouse. Maybe you'll end up with no career after a while. And he didn't work, if I remember correctly, for, as we talked before, he had real ebbs and flows. There was some time after Fire Walk With Me where he didn't work, and then he tried to make Mulholland Drive into sort of a sequel to Twin Peaks that was going to star Audrey Horne, if I remember correctly, but then that didn't work out, and there was all sorts of ways he couldn't have predicted it was going to go. And then Mulholland Drive did really well, so he's back on top for a while, and then his next projects didn't do well. Inland Empire wasn't really a movie people thought of as a movie.
Kind of like a really long YouTube video, honestly. In a lot of ways.
I saw it in theaters a couple years ago and was just, it is such an endurance struggle. And then the moments of levity are such an oasis where you feel so happy to get a period in the film where you can just laugh and feel light. And then it just weighs you down so hard again while intriguing you the whole time. 3 hours. It's like committing half your day when you're going to see the uncut Inland Empire. And then he made The Straight Story, I think for Disney, which is based on a true story of a guy being like, my brother's sick, getting on a tractor, gonna see him. Like, okay, you can walk faster with the tractor. Yep, it's okay. And the guy's real last name was Straight. And it's a straight story because he's going relatively straight on a tractor to go see his dying brother. And I'm pretty sure he got at least one Twin Peaks alum in that movie. I think it was Harry Dean Stanton is the brother.
I think you're right, yeah. I haven't seen it, but that sounds right.
It's been a little while. Yeah, and Harry Dean Stanton, just an aside, played a character named Travis in a movie called Paris, Texas. And that's where Travis Touchdown got his name.
Really?
From No More Heroes.
Okay.
Yeah. The splintering connections. You talked before that you want this podcast to be about not only Twin Peaks, but the way it influenced things. And I know some stuff about that, and that's one of the ways it kind of filtered in, because part of the reason Student 51 like Paris, Texas is because Harry Dean Stanton was in Fire Walk with Me, and he was also in Repo Man, which is a movie that's in this kind of surrealist, magical realism period in the 80s and 90s. So they're all friends.
Interconnected, and that brings us perfectly to the topic of spoilers and getting back to why I got into Twin Peaks the way I did, the unusual, strange way. You are one of my idols in many ways, but particularly in terms of your attitude throughout the years toward spoilers has been trailblazing, as far as I'm concerned. I remember when I first became aware of you, I was one of those guys. Well, for one thing, I was not an adult yet. So I was an angry little child on the internet who hated getting things spoiled for me because it robbed me of the opportunity to be the most intellectual neckbeard online about these things and figure them out for myself. And little boys hate shit like that. They hate being robbed of those opportunities. So I was angry at you that you would go out of your way to spoil things and then laugh about it on podcasts, and you thought...
Oh, that was mean, though. I shouldn't have done that.
No, but here's the thing. You're right. You're a genius. Because spoilers don't fucking do anything in almost any work of art. They don't actually ruin anything for you. And in fact, Twin Peaks particularly, and David Lynch's work overall, is sort of spoiler-proof in a way, where I can watch episode 8 of The Returns and it answers so many questions, for one thing, that haven't been asked by the rest of the show, but also it answers so many things that the show has addressed, and it's strange because it's an incredibly surreal episode, and it has almost no traditional story going on through it that it presents to the viewer, at least. However, it's one of the most straightforward things David Lynch ever made in a lot of ways, and very literally just lays out exactly what he's trying to tell you. It's almost like an entry point. It's almost like he created it as an intentional standalone thing that says, even if you've never seen Twin Peaks and you've never seen my work in general, this is my whole deal. And this is also... if you've heard of Twin Peaks, this is also Twin Peaks' whole deal. So it's about a magic bubble who goes to Earth to fight another magic bubble. And that's it. That doesn't necessarily mean anything more or less than that, but it winds up being about a lot more. So anyway, you've often been of the opinion, from what I can tell, that spoilers don't impact a work. And for me, Twin Peaks not only was unaffected by spoilers, but I've actually found it to be a much more enriching experience because I've had things spoiled about it for me throughout the years. I've had all this pop culture osmosis that's allowed me to come into episode 8 of the final season of the show and enjoy it and gain things from it and have it be an emotionally and intellectually nutritional experience for me. And then I got to carry that knowledge backwards through the rest of the show, and I got to think about those bigger questions and situations while I was seeing them dredge Laura Palmer's body out of the lake wrapped in plastic. It's a strange way to get into a work, but I feel like it's... and I wasn't doing this on purpose. I'm not this much of an artiste or whatever. I feel like I found the exact right way to get into this thing for what it is, by complete accident.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think David Lynch would love to hear that. I think he would really relate with the fact that you bounced off his work for so long, because connecting with his stuff, in my opinion, is like making a friend. It's like you really get to know him and at the same time not know for sure at all what's going on beneath the surface. So you feel like you do, but you are never certain. And it's not always the right time to make friends with somebody. The setting has to be right, the entry point has to be right, and you have to be able to make like a genuine connection. So, a lot of my best friends, I will sometimes know them at work for a long time, and we never get to talk about stuff that matters to both of us because the setting we're in, we have to focus on work and it doesn't bring out the best in us and whatever. But then if you're lucky, there can just be this moment where the stars align and you get to really connect with them, and that opens everything up. And now when I see them at work, I'm like thrilled. And the connection we made that one time made everything else make more sense, and I like them like in every setting. And with David Lynch too, if you watch, Wild at Heart for the first time, that's one that people bounce really hard off of, I find, because it's Nicolas Caging it up hard. It's, I think, when he started his like kabuki theater philosophy on acting.
He is my favorite actor, by the way. He has been my entire life.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm a big fan of his too. He's someone who I feel like if I met him, I would like being with him, but I'm not sure how much he notices other people, because he's just going. He's just on his, he's going where he's going, and you can come or you don't have to, but he's got to go there either way. So yeah, I think about Nicolas Cage for sure, and that's when he started blasting off and not necessarily trying to recreate a real human being anymore. It was just raw feeling.
That gave him permission to just tap into his own raw energy and find a way to put that on screen.
And he's been at it that way for some time. But it causes people to just be like unsure of what they're watching, and the expectation, of course, seeing Academy Award winning Nicolas Cage from The Rock and from all these kind of mainstream fun movies he made. Suddenly he's doing what he's doing in that movie with Laura Dern again, who's one of Lynch's favorites. A lot of people just can't handle that one. And it's not, in my opinion, quite as raw in terms of its potency. It doesn't give you as much to chew on as The Return did, for instance. I feel like Lynch might have been a little muddled about, am I going to be mainstream, or am I going to, like, not so much that he was going to make a Fast and Furious movie or anything, but he was like less fully tapped into his own creative process, I feel like, in that one. And yet I still really love that one. It's fun to see him just being like playful and not necessarily driving home some sort of darkness or underlying meaning all the time, and just have Nicolas Cage jump on a bed for a while and pretend to be Elvis and then go to a rock show. It's
amazing. Strangely enough, that's one I've been saving for a special occasion. I'm still working my way
hope I didn't spoil it.
No. Oh, yeah, I couldn't live with myself. I would track you down. But yeah, I haven't seen, I'm not comprehensive. So this podcast is about Twin Peaks, which is a good time to mention this. It's about Twin Peaks, but this is not a recap podcast. It's not a show where I'm going to come on with an encyclopedic knowledge and try to act like I'm smarter than all my guests and I'm the most informed person to be doing a David Lynch podcast. I'm not an expert. I haven't even seen all of his stuff. When I did watch through the entirety of Twin Peaks, there were large swaths of it that just sort of washed over me, because they do that. Even the most hardcore fans don't really pay too much attention to a lot of what happens in season 2.
Mm-hmm.
The best moments are just pure vibes and not the actual story going on. But it's still a great watch. But the point is, I think that so many people love Twin Peaks who have never seen Twin Peaks. Just like me. Just like I loved Twin Peaks when I played Link's Awakening as a 3 or 4-year-old back in the early 90s. I loved Twin Peaks and I didn't really know what it was, and I had no idea until last year exactly how it was like it or what that even meant. And I've played especially video games. You and I are video game guys, especially video games and especially Japan. I have a hyperbolic theory that Japan itself, modern Japanese pop culture, is a spin-off of Twin Peaks. Because, there's Silent Hill, there's Earthbound, there's, and then Earthbound, of course, influences thousands of things on its own. And just Zelda alone, because it's not just Link's Awakening, it's also Majora's Mask that takes a lot after Twin Peaks. And then both of those games are they've become the snobby Zelda fans' favorite Zelda game, both of them. And basically, they've gone on to have an outsized impact on that series as a whole. So there's still lots of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom things that make me think of Twin Peaks and David Lynch now. There's still lots of things that evoke that vibe. However, 30 to 50 million people have played those Zelda games, and only maybe a couple of million people have ever watched Twin Peaks. But everyone who's playing those Zelda games and enjoys all these things about them enjoys them because of where they came from. And in fact, I recently saw, right before I left Twitter, I saw that both Mark Frost and David Lynch were very active on Twitter for how big they are and how reclusive they are in some ways. However, I saw that Mark Frost very, very recently confirmed that he had been aware of Link's Awakening this whole time. Not only aware of it, but he actually took a meeting or two with Nintendo where he gave them some notes about it. So throughout all these years, we've assumed as a culture that Nintendo just loved Twin Peaks and they were trying to get their own... They were trying to find a way to spice up a little Game Boy game with some extra flavor on the cheap. And that's the extent of it. But what we found out recently is that, no, this was a direct influence. One of the actual guys came on and told them things they should do. And now every Zelda game is like that. And millions of people love them.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we would have non-playable characters that are there to add atmosphere and add surrealism in games in general if it weren't for Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks, nobody knew what to do with it when it first came out. I was alive for it, so I remember being at recess and kids talking about Twin Peaks when they shouldn't have watched it. And nobody was like, this show is so weird. This show is so avant-garde. People were like, everyone's attractive. I have a crush on this one. I have a crush on that one. You know, Bobby or James, the girls had crushes on them. The guys had crushes on Shelley or Laura. And then Laura had her cousin, whose name's suddenly escaping me, who also...
Maddie.
She's
full of secrets, if you'll remember.
And things didn't go well for her either. So it was, and it was funny and it was weird. And it had people on the edge of their seat. But the fact that it was surreal wasn't what anyone was talking about, as I recall. And it showed people who wanted to be surreal, and video game developers of that time, they chose video games instead of movies for a reason, for the most part, just because they wanted to dive into the abstract and dive into things that required a little bit more work of the audience because they're actually playing and needing to put some of themselves into it, which is all stuff that's surrealist and Dadaism and blah, blah, blah. They all wanted people to have to, not just show up and get entertained and leave. They wanted people to have to think and feel while they're engaging with what they made. So it made sense to all these video game developers that we can just do it the Twin Peaks way without doing a one-to-one copy of it. And it would end up working for them. And the whole concept of walking around a town and just chatting with NPCs, it happened a few times before Twin Peaks. It happened much more after Twin Peaks.
And it especially happened that they actually had anything to say that felt like not necessarily a normal human being, but NPCs would usually just give you expositional dialogue a lot before that. And now NPCs exist for flavor. They exist to add texture to the world. You want to talk to them even if they're not telling you anything useful. Right. That's what I spend so much time in Zelda games, like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, doing. When I'm not out there doing dungeons, I'm just puttering around town. I'm looking at what people are doing. I'm tracking their schedules. I'm talking to them to see if they have new dialogue. And usually it's weird and dumb and doesn't do anything to help me play the Zelda game. But I love it. And it's why I'm there at this point.
Yeah, it's they have their own lives that don't revolve around you and your quest. And it's nice to take a break from yourself. And the irony of it with video games is you're already taking a break for yourself by pretending to be Link, and then you're pretending to be Link being sick of being Link, and now I just want to know, why is this guy so obsessed with cats? And I'm going to see if I can help him find his cats. You get to take a massive break from everything and just exist for a little bit, which is a big part of what Twin Peaks did that people could pick up on at the time, which was how many little subplots, but Mark Frost being a soap opera expert he was able to know that from the start, that people could really get engaged with fictional characters in that way. But with the Lynch influence, deciding that it'll be a woman with an eye patch who can't stop her exercise bike. And I don't know if you know this one. You know the Big Ed and his wife? Norma. She's riding an exercise bike super hard and miserable, and Big Ed comes in and he's like, "What's wrong?" She's like, I can't remember exactly what she says, but she's full of stress. It seems like it has nothing to do with anything. But it turns out, and this was backed up by an interview that the actress did at some point, David Lynch had whispered in her ear something like, "She wants to have a baby, but she can't. That's the feeling." And it's like, what? Nobody would have known that that's what it was about. But the feeling is crystal clear when you watch it. And after you see it, as you're saying, with spoilers, sometimes you need to know what something's about before you understand that the way it goes about expressing what it's about makes sense. I mean, all my favorite movies are way more fun to watch the third or fourth time because I know what it's about and I don't have to take in the story and keep track of the plot. I already know all that. Then I just get to enjoy how it happens instead of making sure I'm keeping up with what is happening. So,
such a perfectly succinct way to sum it up. You're at Tron Knots on Blue Sky. That's where I find you these days.
That's right. That's where I'm at.
You have the Talking to Women About Video Games podcast. You can find more information about that there.
Yep.
And just generally, you work on Nintendo Force magazine, which is the successor to Nintendo Power, and is greatly appreciated on that front.
Thanks.
And I need to re-up my subscription, speaking about my inconsistent support of you. I would love to find a way to buy every issue that exists and then start catching up. I know that's probably unrealistic, but...
If I have there's an episode where there's an issue where I talk about many of the things we talked about on this episode. For some reason, I always, when I can, work in a David Lynch reference to Nintendo Force magazine, the spiritual successor to Nintendo Power, designed to be read by parents and their children as they play Mario Party Jamboree. I'll suddenly just be like, when Laura Palmer's corpse was found, I'll just get it in there if I can. So I'll see if I can find that issue and mail it to you if I have one.
That would be incredible, and I'd really appreciate it. But the point is, Jonathan is out there. He doesn't want to be out there. He wants to be in there. He wants to be in where he is, taking care of his responsibilities.
Sure.
And I'm going to let him start doing that again, because I know he has things to do right now. So, Jonathan, thank you so much. You are the Laura Palmer of this podcast. You're the patron saint of this podcast. We're going to be spending every subsequent episode with our guests figuring out what has happened to you and why you're not famous, while also exploring the legacy of Twin Peaks as it's affected pop culture. And you've given me, I already had so many ideas for episode topics, and you've doubled the amount of ideas I've had just throughout the course of this conversation. Wow. So you are already an incredibly valuable business partner in this pop culture sensation event that's about to start.
I love announcing that we've succeeded already.
We have succeeded already. We are already making money, Jonathan. That's also why I'm paying you. I'm already making money out of this.
Congratulations and thank you. So here we are. We've done it.
Here we are. And here we will be again. Jonathan will be back with us whenever he has an opportunity and the desire to do so. Until then, you'll hear him in future episodes as some secret messages and just hearing his opinions out of context to help us get conversations started with other guests about their favorite David Lynch-inspired media. This is going to be a good time.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
You can find Jonathan on Twitter as Non-Trotsky and Blue Sky as Tron Knots. His Patreon is Talking to Women About Video Games, a podcast where he interviews incredible game developers, journalists, and enthusiasts alike about the biggest medium in entertainment history. You can also find his work at Nintendo Force magazine, as we've mentioned a few times now. It's a wonderful replacement for a Nintendo Power if you miss that like I do. You can find our show on Twitter, Blue Sky, Patreon, and more as Fix Your Heart Pod. Shy Fox, however, is not online any more than he can help it. By the way, you can find more from our auspicious producer Daniello Sanfortalamenti on Bandcamp and on Spotify. Make sure to check out his other work. He does good stuff for talking to women about video games as well as many other projects of his own. Wait, what the hell? Who do you think that is there? Why, it's our one-armed producer, Daniello Sanfortalamenti. He's defiantly strolled out of his recording booth to dance saucily right in front of Jonathan's face.
That's so typical of Daniello Sanfordo. Lamenti?
What's this? Now he's holding up something that looks like an old Nintendo Game Boy. Great Garmin Boja, Jonathan. He's holding up a cartridge of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. And also a flaming playing card with a picture of the Jimquisition's own Conrad Zimmerman? Tune in within the next few weeks for this foundational entry in our look at the enduring legacy of Twin Peaks. Until then, you clowns out there in Congress and the FBI, fix your heart or die.
Fix Your Heart or Die podcast is hosted by Shy Fox and produced by Daniello Sanfortalamenti. Music by Daniello Sanfortalamenti. Sound effects sourced from Pixabay. Check the show notes of this episode for links to our guests' social media and additional resources about the projects they're promoting. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/fixyourheartpod.
If Elliot Page is anything like me, then he can have mixed emotions about projects he's involved with.
Sure.
Where it's like, I love this in concept, but in like Teenage Pokemon, for instance.
Yeah. Kiddo's Fuck Shack. I love it.
What a great memory you have for Teenage Pokemon.
It hasn't been that long since I watched it, buddy. I'm serious.
Well, Daniel re-uploaded.
The other Daniel, yep.
Per my weird request.
They're artisanally re-uploaded.
Yeah. Teenage Pokemon HD Remaster.
Yeah.
It's better than any of the actual Pokemon remakes, as far as I can tell.
That's kind. Yeah, they don't put their A-teams on those remakes, I don't think. My oldest son recently has been demanding a Teenage Pokemon DVD. So when you have the chance, Daniel Sanford, burn it to a DVD, please.
I will definitely do that.
I won't let him watch it, though. There's too many swears. I have to personally go in there and bleep them out. Yeah, it's too much work for you.
I'll bleep them. I'll mail you a DVD.
Record ADR where you replace swear words with things like sugar and melon farmer like they used to do for old TV shows.
I have Daniel Fox. It's so funny you would say that. I was ranting to poor Suda51 about that less than a year ago, that I thought Shadows of the Damned, if he did a Shadows of the Darned mode where you can dub in, Melon Farmer and all that stuff, then it would actually sell better, because a lot of people want to play that game, but they won't play it around their kids.
That would be brilliant. I would find the shit out of it.
I'll let him know if I talk to him ever again.
Or the sugar out of it. So to speak.
That's right. But yes, I'm wasting time. We've got a show.
No, this is not a waste of time. We're here to talk. So
is this the show?
Flow. I mean, it will be.
The happening be happening.